I'm Rick Bennett, and I invite you to check out my work at rickbennettwatercolors.com. This is a self-portrait I did of myself. Today I'm going to talk about ways of correcting watercolor. And so one of the things that I do is I work in very, very wet paint. So that means I have the opportunity to lift back out to delicate. So I'm going to do a simulation of this truck windshield on how you can see colors coming through. This same technique was used in painting this bagel cooker. I wet the area that I wanted to drop paint in. I drop wet, juicy paint in, and then I use my thirsty brush. That's a wet brush that you take a tissue and dry it back to merely damp, and I'm going to demonstrate this technique. And I lifted the whites back in by pulling the paint out, and I could very surgically, with the tip of my brush, adjust that. So I take my water brush, and I'm going to drop in just a pretend oval to quickly demonstrate this of wetness. And it's going to be very wet. It's going to be starting to soak into the paper, and the fibers are going to be damp to start with, and they're filling up with water. They're not going to allow a lot of water to intrude to the interior. So as I'm painting, I'm going to pretend that back behind the truck someplace is some greens showing through. There's going to be some blues of the skies coming in and out in some places. So that's my pretend skies. I'm going to take a smaller brush and drop in some greens from the background that kind of show through in some spots. And that looks like a hot mess, doesn't it? So now I'm going to take my thirsty brush. That's my water brush. And I'm going to take the paint out of it, and I'm going to lift some glints of light back in. See how I can get my whites back? And I can start to correct some of those blues that are too dark. And when you're dropping in, you keep dropping into all the colors in place. Then when you start lifting out, you don't drop in anymore because you're drying your paper. And as you start to dry this painting, if you drop paint in, it's going to be unevenly wet, and you're going to get back runs. But what I'm doing, see how I'm going back to just a delicate yellows, kind of greens showing through. I'm going to lighten some of my blues and get some of my pale whites back. So I've got glints of light represented by pales. I've got some blues from the sky showing in there. And in between, you're seeing through to some of the greens of the shrubbery that might be back there. It's not very green for the purpose of the demonstration, but I can drop a little bit of more blue. There we go. See how I greened it up a little bit? Got a little bit of that cerulean in there. It made the colors and the lights and the darks that I wanted to see in there. I could even take a little bit of some black, and could have put that in for that represents the seats, but I'm drying now, so I'm not going to do that. So this is dropping wet into wet, but in very small sections. It's developing the painting by section, but because I've got lots of wet paint, I can adjust that paint. The other way to paint really, really wet is, in case of the skies, you've seen this before, you drop in a lot of wet water, and then you drop your color in to start creating the clouds and the colors that you want. In this particular painting, I painted the colors all the way to the bottom, the pinks that are showing through, and the pinks are underneath these outer land masses that are out here. After this totally dried, I layered my land masses on top of the pinks, and I put in a dark boat. So if you're putting darks on top of colors, the undercolor is going to peek through and be very pretty, and you're going to be able to create the kind of gradient that's going on in this big, wet, juicy place. And this is happening by first painting in my water. I'm going to move this piece of paper away because it's in my way, and I'm reversing the order I was planned, but I'll wing it. And I'm going to just put a big puddle of water down. There's two ways you can do this. One, you can put a big old puddle of water down and then let it soak into the interior. You wait about 3 minutes, and it will start to dampen the paper interior. And this isn't tape down because it allows the paper to more evenly expand and you get less buckling this way. So the purpose of this demonstration, I'm not going to do that first method because after I paint all this wet, I would have to keep adding water, and then after about 3 or 4 minutes, I would pour off the excess. In this case, I'm just going to paint wet in very quickly. It's going to allow me to come in and start painting in my skies. I can use some pinks in this. And because this is so wet, the paint is going to be suspended above the paper. And then I start dropping in my darks. My ultramarine blue is going to be the color of the sky over your head. Now, this is going to dry about 20 to 25% lighter. And my big over my head sky clouds are going to be very large. They're going to be bigger. The color is going to be more royal ultramarine blue. And I need to paint this ultramarine blue darker, and it's going to dry because it's going to dry very, very light. So I'm getting some thicker paint right here to darken it in the corners. Everything is very wet. And here's where I start to transition over to getting some cerulean, which I have covered up. My cerulean now has green in it, so we're going to get some more cerulean. John Singer Sargent said that what we do as artists is create problems and then figure out how to fix them, and that's kind of what I do with videos. There we go. Now I'm going to start with some cerulean. I'm going to go down low and make some thinner clouds down here. And this needs to be darker and brighter than I'm gonna need it. I like to get in the place where I mix my cerulean with my ultramarine and get those mixes and where they sit next to each other. Wet into wet. Now, if that had gone down too dark in any spot, where would I say that would be? Say if it's starting to close in on my clouds, I can take my tissue and start lifting this back. Now, once you start lifting, you don't lift anymore, but see how it starts to create feather patterns at the edge of my clouds. And I start to get some feathering. I can enlarge these clouds. I can get some shapes out here. I can say, oh, this is a little too sudden a transition along this edge right like in here. It also starts to dry my paper. So that's going to give me the ability to get some drying to happen in there. I'm liking the way these are fuzzy right here, but I might want to separate them just a little, bring them out just a bit more. So this is wet into wet. I have the ability when this is just as wet to come in and start lifting back. Now, one of the things that happened when I lifted this back, I lost some of that water. Here's something that's worth noting. If I take water and put back into my paper right there, I can then start lifting again, and it lifts. Even though that was a staining ultramarine blue, and even though it wasn't wanting to lift anymore, I can put a little, I've lifted the water out of that spot. So if I come in and lift it again, I have the ability, I put water in, now I can lift water out with paint in it. It's gonna lift where it didn't want to lift before. So drop in a little water here and immediately lift it out. You don't want to leave it in there. You don't want, because that's going to create an uneven wetness and it might start a back run. So this is the point where I'm going to talk about one more way of moving water across your paper in a very wet manner. My paper is warped a little bit. So in order to create this fun textural pattern back here, I'm going to lay a wall of water right against where this starts, and I'm going to pull it across all the way, the whole length of this, and it has to be really wet. And the reason I want you only drop wet into wet, and so you keep it wet, and if it's wet the whole time, then when I finish over here, I can start lifting out to delicates. It's easier to drop in brighter colors than you need, and lift back to delicates than it is to put in perfect. I'm only going to do up to here before I start lifting because I don't want to make you watch me paint 30 minutes of painting. So the first thing I do is I come in and I put in clean water. And if you put your brush in the wrong container, your clean water is now your colored water. So you just watch the fast correction. Sorry about that. So I'm gonna take a big brush and I'm gonna start a wall of water right here so that when I start putting my paints in, they're gonna be very wet. They're gonna be vibrant and wet. I'm gonna put another little dash of water right here. And as I move across, I may use that. Now the paints I'm going to be using are cerulean, lemon yellow to make a yellow green, and I've got some rose over here. And so next to my yellow pears, I'm going to be dropping in some color that's not the pears. So in this case, I can start in that puddle of water with some bright blue, and it's going to separate from the pears by colors, and I'm going to start making shapes. Another color that would be good to get in here is I like rose, and it's going to be just a color. Now it's easy to see how loud these are, but you're going to watch and see. I'm going to have the ability to decide how vibrant these things stay. Now that rose is going to look really pretty next to my yellow green. And we'll put that right here. And it's going to mix a little bit and make some grays. Now see, there's some dry spot on the high part of this. So I'm going to get my water brush. And I'll have to test to see if that's that's my blue brush. That's my water brush. I'm going to drop some wet in here. I need this to stay wet for a long period of time. Now's when I can start coming in next to this pear with some greens. And I need some yellows. Then I'll come over here with some yellows that are just pure yellow. And whenever you go behind something, you're going to want to jump to the other side and put it on the other side, and that's going to bring that part forward. So now I've got some yellows over here. I'm going to come up next to my pears and make sure I get that rid of the whites. I get some more water in here. Now I'm going to come in with some of my green just to make this big. And notice I'm making different shapes. So I'm going to clean my brush, go over here and find some place to sneak in some rose in this. And I think just a stripe of it right up there. And now some cerulean to mix into my greens. Now you're thinking this is a hot mess, and I agree with you. And I'm going to pause there with the demo so you can watch the next step. This is where I take my water brush, I remove all my excess water, and I start lifting back my worst offending spots. So look what happens to this pink. See how delicate that gets? It becomes very delicate. I can get my blues to come lift out. Clean tissue. Now let's say that blue has stopped lifting. I'm going to put a little water in there because it's on the top. Now look how it lifted. So if I put water in and lift immediately, I won't get a back run, and it will lift back to delicate colors. Now I didn't have to go this loud. I don't have to soften this much. It still could be brighter. It could be just, the yellow is really kind of obnoxious. I'm gonna put a little water in. It's getting stubborn. So I'm just gonna take some water and put right into these puddles that are starting to dry a little bit and lift right back out immediately. And that blue right there we go. It decided to let go. So the other thing I can do is I can take my tissue and start to lift, and that's going to dry faster, and it's going to add texture to the painting. You're going to get some textural effects. Now I'm going to look at this and say, okay, my worst offending spots, where is it still bothering me that I want to adjust this thing? And I would say this pink right here needs to come out. There we go. See how that softened even more? I put a little water in, take a little water out. There's some harsh right there, a little harsh right there. So see how light this can get? You can lighten back to pales from really dark strident colors and get the atmosphere that you want to make. So the wetter you paint, the more you can adjust, the longer you have to drop in color and lift back to delicates. Next section, I'll be doing another video. It will have scratching out and getting your whites back. Happy painting.